Good morning. It is great to see everybody here on this Labor Day weekend. Typically, this kind of marks the end of summer for us here in Kentucky as we move forward into our fall season. And I hope that this weekend, maybe you're getting some much needed rest. Maybe you get the day off tomorrow, I hope. So rest up and let's prepare ourselves here for the weeks ahead. Over the last few weeks, I got to go down a little bit. Over the last few weeks, Joe's been taking you through a series called Roof Crashers, where we look at several different stories from Jesus' ministry in Luke chapter 5. And so in Luke chapter 5, last week he talked about embracing the mess. Embracing the mess. So we see that Jesus is eating with this group of sinners, this guy named Levi, who's a tax collector, who later becomes Matthew. And we learn just how messy ministry can be, but in a really good way, and why it's important for us to look at that, right? So this morning, if you have your Bible or your app, I want you to go ahead and turn to Matthew chapter 10. We're going to be not so much focusing on the mess, but the challenges. And so if you make comparisons between Luke's gospel and Matthew's gospel, Luke chapter 5 and Matthew chapter 9 are very similar. So you got the three synoptic gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, where you see very similar stories, maybe in just a little bit different order. But like I said, Luke 5 and Matthew 9 are very similar. Now, John's a little bit different, just like our John here. It's always a little different, right? But I love you, John. All right. But anyway, I always think it's interesting how God can lay out a direction, right? Because Joe asked me to take this several weeks ago before I had any idea what the series was. And he just told me, he said, hey, look at something about outreach. So read through some stuff. I find Matthew chapter 10. It kind of stuck with me as I researched, and it's amazing how it aligns up perfectly with what we just wrapped up. It's always encouraging to see how God works and line things out. But this morning, I have a question, is how do you embrace challenges when they come to your way? And there's really only two approaches that you can take. Either you're going to see the challenge as some impenetrable barrier that you're never going to get through, or you're going to embrace the challenge and figure out a way to overcome it. And now there's two ways, right? One usually leads to giving up, the first one, and the second one usually leads to resilience and success. And so these challenges are from outside sources. There's some challenges that we don't really have control over that come our way that we have to figure out how to get through. There's also challenges that we sometimes even bring about on ourselves. It all goes back to how we are going to approach them. And so one instance of one of these challenges was with a 25-year-old lady named Erica Hurt. And I have a picture of Erica here for you to see. This was taken in 2016 in a parking lot outside of Hope, Indiana. And it's taken by a police officer, and it goes viral all over social media. And this photo became famous because in this picture, this shows Miss Hurt overdosing on heroin in this parking lot. And what's even worse is what you can't see, that in the back seat, her infant son Parker is crying while she shoots up this heroin. And so all this was reported on Today.com, and they reported that she had to be revived by using Narcan, and later she goes to jail. She's sentenced to 2 years, which later gets reduced, and she has to serve 6 months in prison. So what's interesting is when this photo was first released, Ms. Hurt also made a statement that she could not believe that they would post this photo online. Said she was angry and humiliated, right? And she didn't believe that they should have done that, right? She didn't want people to know what was going on in her life. And while in prison, her challenge becomes even greater because they would bring her son Parker to come see her, and over time, he would not even come sit with her, right? So he did not want to see her. He did not recognize her during that 6-month stay. So I'm going to pause right there. We'll come back to that later, but we all face some kind of challenge in our life, and it may not be that drastic, but Erica Hurt here is facing an incredible challenge, right? She's a drug addict. She's now in prison, and her child's starting to fade from her life. And now she's left with two options. She can either embrace this challenge and find a way to overcome it, or she can see it as some impenetrable barrier where she's just going to continue to fall further and further away. And so as Christians, we too, as you're sitting here, we are faced with challenges. We're not immune from the challenges in our lives just because we're followers of Christ, especially when it comes to being servants and witnesses for Him. So Matthew chapter 10, Jesus uses a way to encourage and prepare His disciples for what they're faced and give us some insight to what we should be doing and what we can expect when we try to go out and tell people about Jesus. Now, first of all, let's listen to how it wraps up in Matthew chapter 9 before we dive into chapter 10. It says, Jesus went through all the towns and the villages, teaching in their synagogues, proclaiming the good news of the kingdom, and healing every disease and sickness. When He saw the crowds, He had compassion on them because they were harassed and helpless, like sheep without a shepherd. And then He said to His disciples, the harvest is plentiful, but the workers are few. Ask the Lord of the harvest, therefore, to send out workers in the field. And I think the thing that sticks out to me in that verse is, the harvest is plentiful, but the workers are few. And I want that to stick with you as well as we go throughout the chapter, because we have a great calling to go out and reach people, but unfortunately there's only a few people that are up to the challenge. And as we're about to find out, it is not an easy task. It's very difficult. However, if you read this chapter, there's some hard truths in it, but the reward can be pretty significant. So go ahead. Hopefully you've opened up to Matthew chapter 10. I just want to briefly touch on the first 15 verses. We're not going to spend a lot of time there this morning, but Jesus is commissioning His disciples for their mission. He lists all 12 disciples there. They're given extraordinary power and authority from Christ to perform these miracles, and their ministry parallels what we just read in chapter 9 and back in chapter 8 as well. And the reason why we're not going to focus on this, because the commission of these 12 men here in the beginning were to go out and to reach the nation of Israel, or all the Jewish people. And that is different, right, than our commission today. Our commission includes all the world, all people everywhere, right, not just the nation of Israel. So I think learning from those first 15 verses is important for spiritual principles, and this paragraph's okay, but right, it's not exactly what we have been sent here to do, right? And so we're going to go ahead and start in verse 16. So read along with me. It says, I am sending you out like sheep among wolves. Therefore be as shrewd as snakes and innocent as doves. Be on your guard, and you'll be handed over to the local councils, be flogged in the synagogues. On my account, you will be brought before governors and kings as witnesses to them and the Gentiles. But when they arrest you, do not worry about what to say or how to say it. At that time, you will be given what to say, for it will not be you speaking, but the Spirit of your Father speaking through you. Brother will betray brother to death, father his child, children will rebel against their parents and have them put to death. You will be hated by everyone because of me, but the one who stands firm to the end will truly be saved. When you are persecuted in one place, flee to another. Truly I tell you, you will not finish going through the towns of Israel before the Son of Man comes. Now, if you read that and just don't dig into the context much, that's not the greatest recruiting pitch, right, just from an outside perspective. But as I said, we're being instructed to go out and make more disciples. But Jesus here gives us some guidance that says, hey, this is not going to be a walk in the park. It's not going to be that easy. He's sending us out, like verse 16 says, sheep among wolves. And so the first challenge that we have to recognize this morning is when we go out and tell people about Jesus, oftentimes it's going to be met with an unwelcoming response. And the reality is, some people are only going to receive Christ's message with an open heart. And so he tells us we have to balance being compassionate, kind, sympathetic, generous, all these things, right, while also being tough-minded. That's why he says, be as shrewd as snakes, but innocent as doves. And it's even harder to hear later on where this rejection is just going to come from. Organized religion, government, and even in your own family. So Jesus here is telling us it's coming from some powerful places. You're going to face rejection in all of these, in places that most of us tend to trust, right? And while it's going to be difficult, there's always a way to attack these challenges. And that's what I want you to focus on this morning. We cannot see them as some impenetrable barrier, but we have to find a way around and a way to attack them. So how do we do that? You embrace the opportunity. Embrace the opportunity. You see, if you're going to get opposition from all these various places in your life, that means there's going to be a lot of opportunities to tell people about Jesus. And if I were to calculate or ask you in your daily life when you go out, how many times do you have to tell people about Jesus? How many opportunities, how many chances each day or every week? My guess, if you really sat down and thought about it, you could have numerous encounters. But how often do we actually act on them? How often do we actually embrace those opportunities to tell people about Him? I'm guilty. I'm sure you're guilty. But during this time in our world, you see the craziness that's happening. We have to start embracing those opportunities and start acting on those if we want to be a church that's going to reach our community. Then he tells us there's even comfort if you're ever put in an emergency or hostile situation, right? He uses the example of being arrested. The Holy Spirit is going to be with you in those situations. Don't worry about what to say or how to say it. He is going to be with you in those circumstances. You can turn opposition into opportunities. And we can trust the Spirit to help us remember what the Lord has taught us from the very beginning. And I think that's very reassuring as a believer here this morning, that no matter what, God's going to be there if you're willing to embrace these opportunities, even in unwelcoming responses. All right, let's go on. Verse 24. The student is not above the teacher, nor a servant above his master. Is it enough for the students to be like their teachers, like their masters? If the head of the household can call Beelzebul, how much more than the members of his household? So do not be afraid of them, for there is nothing concealed that will not be disclosed, or hidden will not be made known. What I tell you in the dark, speak in the daylight. What is whispered in your ear, proclaim from the roofs. Do not be afraid of those who can kill the body but cannot kill the soul. Rather, be afraid of the one who can destroy the soul and the body in hell. Are not two sparrows sold for a penny, yet not one of them will fall to the ground outside of your Father's care? And even the very hairs on your head are numbered. So do not be afraid. You're worth more than many sparrows. So I want to focus quickly on 24 and 25, because I think this is a great reminder. If we're going to embrace these challenges, then when Jesus was here ministering on earth, right, he was persecuted. He was challenged. So why should we expect anything different as his followers? We are not above him. We do not outrank him, right? We are expected to have the same persecution regarding our faith and our beliefs that he encountered as well. I mean, think about it. You're the Son of God. If you're Jesus, you're walking around and they're saying that you're in a league with Satan. That's got to be one of the most, harsh things you could have said to Jesus in that day, right? So we are expected to have the same type of persecution, if not worse. And so if we're going to truly step up and be his followers, we have to realize that. We have to realize suffering is going to take place. And we consider our goal to be more like Jesus. And if we do, the persecution, then it's going to inevitably come. But it leads us to our next challenge in this little section, these few paragraphs, is the challenge is our fear of man. And how do we overcome that fear of man? There's one way to replace that, and that's to have fear of God. If we get to the point as a church or as an individual where we begin to fear man more than we fear God, then we're walking in a dangerous, dangerous place. Because that means that we no longer have any trust in the Lord that he's going to take care and do what he said he's going to do. And the Bible doesn't really hold back any punches when it talks about falling into the trap of being in fear of man. One of my favorite verses in the Bible is Proverbs 25. When it talks about this, it describes it as a trap. It says, the fear of man lays a snare, but whoever trusts in the Lord is safe. And I have a picture there of a snare with that little verse on there. But I don't know if you've ever lived on a farm or been a hunter. You probably know what a snare is. Maybe you've used one before. But at one point on my grandfather's farm, they had a significant coyote problem. And so they would come in and attack cows and sheep and chickens. And so during the wintertime, they would find the holes in the fence right underneath it. You could tell the worn out paths where those coyotes would be coming in. They would set this snare trap, right? And so as the coyotes snuck into the field, you typically would catch them. And so you may never see this in action, but for one, just like in that photograph, for animals, that's pretty visibly hard to see, especially at night or if you're in a hurry, right? And typically it's going to catch that animal by the feet or the neck, right? And so the devastating thing about a snare is the more that animal tries to get out of that snare, the tighter it becomes. And I believe this is why the Bible uses that analogy, that example, right? Because as we begin to fear man more than God, it's kind of indiscernible, right? We may not even realize we're doing it. It may be happening, but all of a sudden, the longer it goes on, the easier it is to get trapped, and that trap just continues to enclose and get tighter and tighter until you can no longer get out. And in today's world, I think that the fear of man is at an all-time high. And there's some things that suggest this, and it all comes down to one major word that all of us are looking for, and it's this word approval. We all are looking for approval. And when we turn to that, seek that approval from those around us, it leads to a fear of anxiety and all these things, right? And so they're starting to do a lot of studies on this in today's culture. So I found one that I really enjoyed that Harvard Business Review did. And they did a study, what they called FOPO, or FOPO, fear of others' opinions. And so here's what they say according to their research. With proliferation of social media, over-reliance on external rewards, metrics, validation, the pressure to succeed for most people is so intense. And this FOPO is even more acute, or even more of a problem. Fear of people's opinions are showing up in everybody's lives, almost everywhere. And when you fall into that, the consequences can be severe. When challenged, we protect our ego and we surrender our viewpoints. We trade authenticity for approval. We try to read the room, not out of benevolence, but to curry favor. We laugh when a joke isn't funny. We bite our tongues when somebody says something offensive. We don't even really listen to people because we're already thinking of a response to say back. And then this one that kind of hits home. We pursue power and money rather than purpose. So as we're trending towards fear of man more than fear of God ever in our history, and it's one thing is working with young folks that I really worry about with social media, because they are so into seeing what everyone else is doing instead of worrying about themselves. They're always trying to live up to something greater by men's standards, right, or by human standards. And I'm afraid if we don't change our mindset, that there's going to be a lot of problems. So how do we shift as followers of Jesus? Because there has to be a shift. We have to make a change. And I don't think there's any more of a difference that we can make unless you put verse 28 up on your phone, on a bulletin board, somewhere in your house, right? Because verse 28 gives you the answer of how you don't fall into this trap, right? Do not be afraid of those who can kill the body but cannot kill the soul. Rather be afraid of the one who can destroy both the body and the soul in hell. You see, most of us would consider death to be the worst possible outcome in this life. A lot of people are worried about it. Most people are insecure about it. And some people are scared about it. However, when it comes to Christianity or belief in Jesus, that mindset has to flip, because we know there's more to look forward to. The Bible tells us that something more extraordinary than any of us could ever imagine. And so our attitude converts from being scared to death. Instead, hey, the worst thing a person can do to me is results in death. That's okay, and here's why. Because I should be more concerned with God, who can not only kill my body, but determine where I can spend eternity. And the fear of God is that fear that cancels everything else, all other fears. So maybe you're still a little bit unsure about that. And I love how it's followed up towards the end of that little section, because it emphasizes just how much God cares for us. He gives us a great example. In those biblical days, sparrows were often sold in the local market. So there'd be dealers out on the corner, and the reason they were there is because if someone could not afford to buy a goat or a sheep to sacrifice, right, then they would go out and they would buy a sparrow or these small birds. And they were so cheap that a dealer would just throw in an extra bird. It's kind of like Oprah, you get a bird, you get a bird, you get a bird, right? So they pay them, and they automatically throw in an extra one. You see this paralleled in Luke chapter 12. But why is that important? Why would they mention sparrows in this section? But it tells us that the Father knew when they fell to the ground, right? Meaning if God cares about a sparrow that much, something considered so insignificant they were given away for free, then how much more does he care about us? People that are serving him, following him. Because to God, we are of much greater value. So there is no need to fear when God cares for us that deeply. All right, let's read 32 through 38. We're going to discover our last challenge. Whoever acknowledges me before others, I will also acknowledge before my Father in heaven. But whoever disowns me before others, I will disown before my Father in heaven. Do not suppose that I have come to bring peace on earth. I did not come to bring peace, but a sword. For I have come to turn a man against his father, a daughter against his mother, a daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law. A man's enemies will be members of his own household. Anyone who loves their father or mother more than me is not worthy of me. And anyone who loves their son or daughter more than me is not worthy of me. And whoever does not take up their cross and follow me is not worthy of me. So this is some of the most challenging words and reassuring words that you can read in the entire Bible, because they bring to light something so demanding that many people don't understand. From the outside, when you read this, it kind of seems like God wants you to hate your children or your mother and your father and not get along, but that's the opposite of what he teaches. But the idea here is this, that the idea is God is more important than even your own family. Which leads us to this last thing, that our next challenge, that cost, right, is a part of being a follower of Jesus. Now, you embrace that cost by knowing the impact that you can have on others and the reward that can bring. You see, once we decide to become followers of Jesus, there is a cost associated with it. But now we're part of something much more significant than before. We're part of this ongoing battle against Satan. And we didn't start the war, but we're here to help fight it. And unfortunately, the reality is there is not going to be peace on earth, but there is peace in heaven, because Jesus made peace through his blood on that cross. And so while here on earth, it is the fact that we're going to be misunderstood, we're going to be persecuted by those people that are even the closest to us. But God's saying it cannot affect your witness. It cannot intercept your mission, even when that happens, because there are people out there who have family members, right, who don't believe in that book, who don't believe in Jesus. And so it is true that it's going to be difficult. It's going to be a challenge, right? But even if you have that family member, even if it's in your own household that's going against you, you still have to take Christ's side. Because there's only two alternatives: spare your life or sacrifice your life. There is no middle ground, is what the Bible is telling us right here. Protect your own interests, we're going to be losers. Right? If we live for his interests, we're going to be winners. You see, spiritual conflict is inevitable here on this world. But if you love something more in this world than you love Christ, then he says you're not worthy. And that's a hard truth to hear. As you read through this entire chapter, there is a lot of hard truths. But it is reality. It is truth. And so the real battle is, are you willing to pay the cost? Are you willing to pay the cost? I want to go back to Erica Hurd. If you got that first slide, bring it back up. And so this story tells us that Erica had a chance to change once before. Her addiction got so bad that she did decide, and her family, to check her into a rehab facility. So she gets clean for about 2 weeks, She stays clean. She goes out, though, 2 weeks later and buys a bag of heroin, and the next day decides to shoot up with her son in the back seat. 2 weeks. That's all she could make it. And she justified it like this. She said, I was doing it because I never believed that my son would know any difference. If you go back, he did know the difference, and he did start to fade from her life, where he doesn't even want to sit with her. You see, what finally made Erica change was her addiction was costing her relationship with her son. In the same way, our addictions, our relationships, our habits, our greed, our jobs, and yes, even our own family can get in the way of costing us the most incredible relationship that any of us will ever have, and that's with Jesus Christ. Many people are unwilling to pay the cost of losing it all to gain so much more. But if you're willing to pay the cost, it allows you to embrace an impact on others and see a reward that can be significant. So the band and folks can come on up here as we close, but I got a picture of Erica today. Much better, right? You know, this picture of Erica is today. Now, Parker is 3 years old. And she said that as she looks back on this picture today, is the best thing that ever happened to her was that picture going viral. And she even posted it sometime herself because she said she likes to look back on it and reflect about how far she has come. She says her relationship with her son is now better than ever, and she now uses her experience in her life to lead a Celebrate Recovery group 3 nights a week there in Columbus, Indiana. She says it's not easy. There's hard days, there's challenges, but the encouragement of that group and knowing that her son is relying on her lets her not give up. And if you're a follower of Christ this morning, obviously we rely on God more than we know, right? But the truth is, he relies on us too. Not because he has to. Don't catch me wrong there. Not because he has to. Because he wants to use us for his work. And we'd also be lying to ourselves if we thought it's going to be an easy task. He expects you to keep going even when you face challenges, even when you hit hard times. He expects you to keep on going because there's going to come a time in your life that you're going to talk about Jesus and you're going to be met with an unwelcoming response. But you embrace the opportunity to do it anyway. There's also going to come a time when you have to take a stand. And you got to make a difficult decision that most people are probably going to disagree with, but you do it because you fear God more than you fear man. And lastly, there's going to be a time in your life when being a follower of Christ is going to cost you something. And it may be difficult, it may even be painful to give up. But when you realize there's nothing compared to God, then you can genuinely make a difference. You can be a part of not only having eternity, but helping someone save their eternity too with God's help. You can help turn their life around when you embrace these challenges. And I don't think it can be summed up any better than the last section of this chapter. And honestly, I don't care if you fell asleep or you didn't hear anything else I said today. I hope you listened to this last verse, these last few verses, because verse 39 is right where it's all at. It says, whoever finds their life will lose it, but whoever loses their life for my sake will find it. And anyone who welcomes you welcomes me, and anyone who welcomes me welcomes the one who sent me. For whoever welcomes a prophet as a prophet will receive a prophet's reward, and whoever welcomes a righteous person as a righteous person will receive a righteous person's reward. I hope that you will continue to embrace the challenges that come your way. No matter when it happens, where it is, put God's needs before your own, because if you do, and he's going to welcome you with open arms, and you're going to live a life worthy of him. So as I see that picture of Erica Hurt, as we go into Back to Church Month here coming up next week, John's going to tell you about, if they had said that picture was in Monticello, Kentucky, I'd have believed it. Because it's not unlikely that something like that can happen here. And there are people out there that need these people that are sitting out here, that need us as a church to tell them about Christ. And maybe you're here this morning, and maybe you're a lot like Eric, and maybe it's not a drug addiction, maybe it's something else. But you've been putting yourself before God. Maybe you felt trapped and you need a way out. Maybe you're relying on all these other things, right? And it's just not working. Just like Erica tried to get clean herself. But you're finally willing to make a sacrifice. There's opportunity this morning, right now, to live for something more by dedicating your life to Christ. And so it's not going to fix everything. There's still going to be challenges. However, you too can live a life worthy of Christ. Because Jesus says, whoever finds their life will lose it. Whoever loses their life for my sake will find it. Stand with us as we sing.